I went down a path that it was not an altered state of consciousness, but it has the potential to help us quantum leap to different levels of consciousness.
Welcome to Liberated Lyfe podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, and today I'm here with my good friend, Alice Chen. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here and excited to see where this conversation goes.
Heck yeah. Alice and I met through a leadership and emotional intelligence training program called Ascension Leadership Academy, which was transformational for both of us. And we really bonded because we both decided to leave our corporate jobs at the same time, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit. But first, Alice, just if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about you and anything else you want to share.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I guess really what is alive in me today, and one of the reasons that we decided to get together is since I've left my corporate job, I've been on this inquiry or this discovery of what it means to live very vibrantly and alive, very curious, very free. And I found myself going through a master's program through the Institute for Aliveness. And through that, I discovered how much play was lacking in my life. And through that process or that curriculum, I had opportunities to do a lot of research papers. And eventually I decided to write a master's thesis on whether or not adult play is a form of an altered state of consciousness. And it was one of the most fun experiences, despite the grueling part of like sitting in front of a computer and reading scientific papers, and also being incredibly profound about the research. And then the curiosity of like, why don't we continue playing in our adulthood? And I know that I have some of my own hurdles in that, even though I studied it and want to advocate for it and want to share it. And I would say like in this moment in my life, like what I'm most passionate about is like sharing with people different ways of living holistically, finding next levels of health through like intimacy, curiosity, and play. Yeah, I would say that that's kind of a short little bio of who I am in this moment.
I love that. And I didn't even think about the irony of writing a research paper about play until you said it, which is kind of funny. But at the same time, research can be play for people. Like, it just depends on your preferences. Some people love to research things. And I think that's beautiful. And I'm also curious, did you reach a conclusion? Is playing an altered state of consciousness?
Yeah, I did. I had to. And it was also so difficult because of how ambiguous play can be. Yeah. Exactly what you just said, that research can be play, right? And then we get into the other big ambiguous topic of like, what is consciousness? Yeah. What is normal consciousness? And then of course, then what is altered states of consciousness, which both gets very subjective. All of it gets very subjective, right? And I think near the end of my research, I found really a pivotal article that changed my mind, I would say, where it spoke into the evolution of play along with the evolution of consciousness. And when I dove into that, it made me sort of see that it was sort of a both and, but because you're writing a thesis and you have to go defend it, I had to make a choice. And what felt true to me in that moment when I realized how it sort of helped me answer that question of like how subjective play is, how it's very ambiguous between what is play to me and what is play to you. And now seeing that as like, oh, we can all be sitting at the same poker table, but we're actually playing different games based on our different levels of consciousness. And it doesn't have to mean like anyone's better or worse than the other person. Is actually we're playing the game with different levels of consciousness. It could be the consciousness of like pure connection.
Yeah.
Or it could be the consciousness of like winning and losing really matters. Or it could be the consciousness of like the Dalai Lama. And it's like, I'm just here as the oneness and connecting with the poker table itself, and the cards and the human beings, all matter, right? And so I went down the path that it was not an altered state of consciousness, but it has the potential to help us quantum leap to different levels of consciousness. And I think that is quite profound to think about. And in a lot of ways, when we start changing our mindset around play, the choice to intentionally take altered states of consciousness, plant medicine, if that's the path we want to go, can also be play. And so, there's a lot that can kind of go into that space. And I also find it really synchronistic and serendipitous in this moment, because today is also the new moon in Gemini, and the Gemini in astrology archetype is also this very playful energy. And so I love that unplanned, or we chose this date without knowing that. And this morning I was like, oh, look at that. How interesting that we get to have this conversation on this really potent day of this new moon, new beginnings, new intentions, and have the beautiful energy of Gemini to be playing along with us through this interview.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up poker, because when I was listening to the podcast that you just did with your friend about play, I was listening to it on my way to play poker on Thursday. I started playing poker on Thursday nights, and that was like most recently the way that I have connected with play in my life is through that. Like, I really lose myself in the process of the game and just playing the game. And for me, play is kind of when I feel like I don't even care about the outcome or the result. I'm just having so much fun in the moment playing the game or doing what I'm doing, that I just, kind of lose sense of like space and time and things like that. And connecting with people for me is a huge part of that. But I love what you said about how everybody at the table is playing a completely different game. And you're right. And I see it. And poker is just a great example, because there's just so many different angles you can play. Some of it's a little bit of luck. Some of it is, skill. And then for me, I noticed for myself, like, how does my vibe or like my thought process throughout the game fluctuate with the hand that I'm playing? Whether the hand causes my reaction or my emotional state causes the hand to like, it's just kind of this interesting exchange of energy too between players. If like two different players always end up at the end of a hand betting against each other, it's like this invisible connection between people. And anyway, there's just like a ton there to talk about. But I also realized through, that quote that you referenced in your thesis of, we don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing. And I started thinking about, why do we stop playing? And even in these situations where like I'm at a bar playing poker and people are playing darts and playing pool, it's like, and we're connecting with each other and we have this play going on, but it's also drowned in like alcohol and just like other toxic behaviors, where it's like we still play as adults, but it's not as pure as when we're kids. And so I'm curious if you, through your research or just through your like thoughts on this play stuff, have discovered like, why do we stop playing? Do we stop playing? And why? Yeah. What's going on there?
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of different areas to unpack that. And that inquiry is powerful, because I almost consider writing my thesis along answering that question as well. It's like, why do we stop playing? Is it because of like fear or shame or embarrassment? Or is it purely like just responsibility that we need to get done? And I think it can be all of the above. And our sort of society doesn't really support us in creating spaces for play, because there's so much projection and external messaging or marketing that tells us like, we need to be responsible, we need to be doing this and this and this and this, right? And so what I loved about my research, though, and why I was tying it to altered states of consciousness is exactly what you just said, Lindsay. You said that when you're playing poker, you sort of like lose yourself in it. And so one of the hardest things that I am beginning to realize that people start asking me when I tell them I wrote a thesis on play is like, well, what is play? Like, how do you define it?
Right.
And there is no definition, but it is this like felt sense within each of us that we just know when this state of being of play is occurring. And through other scholars that I researched, there were two really profound ways that I was seeing how others were trying to define play. And one, which you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, is by the scholar who wrote this book, Homo Ludens, which is like, this human, the humans that play, right? And in it, he defines sort of 5 characteristics of play. And the very first one he speaks into is free, like play is free. And in fact, it is freedom.
Yes.
And when I think about that, when I think about, when I hear you say, like, when I play poker, I sort of lose myself. And that sense of losing yourself, there is this like liberation, the sense of like liberation and freedom. And so when you think about like liberate life, it's like there's like these moments when we are in deep play where we just also have this sense of freedom. We also have this sense of liberation. Yeah. And then this other scholar, which I thought was profound, and I'm not even going to attempt to say his name, but he is also known as the father of flow state. He eventually coined the name flow state. But before he got into that research, he was researching on play. And he was defining play as the absence of boredom and the absence of worry. So when I think about play being super subjective, and I gave this example in my thesis, it's like one person could think like play is like heli-skiing, which is like taking a helicopter up to the mountain slope, jumping out of a helicopter and doing some like super intense downhill skiing, right? And that's play for that one person. But like for me, it's like, oh my gosh, I would be so scared, worried about hurting myself or dying or whatever, right? So it's no longer play for me. Right. But for that person, he is in the zone, or she is in the zone. They are in the zone, right? And they're not bored and they're not worried. They're just in it. Right. And for another person, it could be like folding origami. And they're so into like the perfect fold to make the perfect flower or animal out of this piece of paper. But for someone else, it could be like utter boredom. Like, I would never do that. Well, so then that is not play for that person, but it is play for the person or the player who is deep into origami that they're so a definition of that, again, is like when my mind is not in a state of boredom or worry. And when I thought about that, when I read that article, it was like, well, when I'm personally, as Alice Chen, not in a state of worry and not in a state of boredom, I feel really free. Like I'm free from the stresses of my brain. And so then the question is like, yeah, why aren't we playing? And I think like it comes down to potentially just like conditioning of society. And I think one of the reasons why I am becoming this bigger advocate of it is that like play actually makes us smarter. And through my research, I get into like the neurobiology and the neuroscience of it. And even though at the very end, I argue that it is not an altered state of consciousness, it is still releasing very specific neurotransmitters and hormones in our body that helps us get out of our head a little bit about worry. And it opens up new pathways in our brain for new possibilities and creativity. Mm-hmm. And as we mature as adults and to kind of go full circle to that quote of like, we don't stop playing because we get old because we stop playing. And part of that is because we tend to become these creatures that are on super overdrive in our logical brain that does not, I guess, for me, does not foster like deep vitality and aliveness. And so how do I then create spaces and environments where play is welcomed, and that people, and the other thing about the research is like people need to feel safe to play. And when we're in a culture where marketing or other adults judge us because we're being too goofy or whatever it is, we no longer feel safe to feel like we can be ourselves or play or whatever.
Oh, that's deep. I have so many thoughts. There's so many angles here. And I'm just like thinking as you're talking about this, like specifically with you and I, and like leaving our corporate jobs and exiting the rat race, and like going through that whole process where we go from having such structure in our day to, put on us by somebody else, to then being in control of our own destiny and our own schedule. And how, like you said, I feel like the process of us growing older and being conditioned through school and things like that does lead to less play. And then like, societal pressures and kids being kids and being like bullies and judgmental to each other, but also just the inherent, like innocently, like inherent uniqueness in play for each person is so different that at a certain point, it probably becomes hard for teachers and schools and structures to facilitate for each individual kid. How do we foster play for this child versus this child versus this? It's just like maybe on some level impractical. However, I have my own opinions about the machine and how it, develops us to be little worker bees and stuff like that. But also within that, I loved in your article, you referenced how similar to feeling safe, it's hard to have the experience of freedom or the experience of play or flow state or whatever without structure and without like a container within which to play. So it's ironic, but it's also fascinating because like you and I, when we quit our jobs, we have all this like expansive energy and all this freedom, we think, but then it's like, oh, well, actually, I should probably set up a schedule for myself so that I can not just wander around aimlessly and get bored. That happened to me. I don't know if it happened to you, but definitely I went through that process and had to come back full circle to like, actually some structure is a good thing.
Yeah. 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 Great context to that. And you even use the word bored in it. Yeah. So like, again, if we use that one definition of like play is when you're not bored and when you're not worrying, it's like, oh, when you hit that spectrum of boredom because you have too much spaciousness in your day, then you're again in a different sort of state of being. You're no longer playful, right? And yeah, it's really interesting because there was numerous scholars that will talk sort of about boundaries or containers or frameworks of play. And I think it's a both and that's one of the most interesting things about this topic is like, we can see it in so many different ways. And if I take some of my education from TIFA, from the Institute of Aliveness, and I look at it from this like applied epigenetics perspective, this holistic view, it also comes down to like our nervous system and the window of tolerance we have, right? And so it's sort of like this chicken and egg situation. In order to start playing, one must feel sort of safe and secure. And sometimes the window of tolerance for that one person to begin with is understanding like, what is the boundaries? What is the framework where I can let go and feel that I am held in this safe place to try new things and to be in like whatever kind of energy I want to be in because I'm playing in it, I'm acting, or I'm doing whatever, right? And the beauty of that is like playing sort of helps us find these boundaries and to find these thresholds and to try to like expand them And hence by doing that, also expanding our window of tolerance, hence like creating an ability to stretch our nervous system in maybe a little bit of a safe space. So then when a real stressor comes, I actually have a little bit more resilience in that. And so that's when I say like play, it makes us smarter, or play can really also help our overall holistic health, is because like when I go into the mindset that I am playing and I am experimenting, it is very different than I am like, oh, I'm going to do serious work and try to figure out how to work on my nervous system right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think boundaries are important to get started, but also not having them end up limiting us. Mm-hmm. So it's a both and of like having it there to foster that initial safety and security, and then also being like, how can I now play more to expand that even wider? And I think for you and I, or I guess I can really speak into me, when I quit my corporate job and deeply walked into that unknown, it also felt extremely chaotic. Yeah. There are days where it was too much for my nervous system. And so it makes me wonder is like, and I think about like a sense of vitality and aliveness and liberation is like, it's sort of that idea of that boundary or that threshold again, is like, what is that threshold of like enough excitement that propels me forward, but also a bit of like nervousness and anxiousness to walk into that unknown. But when that anxiousness and nervousness gets too big and it's outside my window of tolerance, then it becomes stress. Then it becomes worry. I'm no longer in play.
Yeah.
And then if it's too easy, if I'm playing a poker game and everyone is sort of at a lesser skilled than me in a poker game no longer is fun, right? Yeah. Because it's like, unless I'm the person that's just there to play to completely win. But it sounds like you were the person that's there for like connection, and you'll read some articles where like, again, back to the idea of boredom and worry is like, poker becomes boring when we're at a table and everyone is just like a novice or a beginner.
Yes.
But if you get to a game,
yeah,
you just get to a game where everyone is like so pretty equal, it gets like, you're just in the zone, and that gets a little bit more exciting, right? And so that's sort of I guess my response to like boundary is like, yes, it is important. And how do we not allow it to limit us?
Yeah.
And I think play is sort of both the activity and the vessel that gets us in it now and out of it at the same time.
And then experiencing the boredom or the worry as the indicator of, okay, I'm bored now because all these players suck. Time for me to go to a new table or whatever. But also like that fluctuation is like, just like the experience of life is like oscillating between these different experiences and then trying to, put it right in the sweet spot all the time, which is a whole nother.
Right. But if you take that same context to like work, if we're in any kind of job, any kind of career, but we're no longer feeling challenged.
Yeah.
Because we gotten so good at creating the same spreadsheet every day or looking at the same project schedule every day, then you sort of lose that sparkle, right? Yeah. So to me, it's not necessarily bad, but it's like when I find myself bored in this new liberated life that I've been creating for myself, then I'm like, oh, I need to go find something challenging for myself. So just like this past month, I started taking dancing classes and swimming classes. And I can even see like my like insecure little girl being like, oh, like, I don't want to be the person that is like the worst in this class. Or like, what if I'm just like the teacher's going to have to correct my swimming stroke, all this stuff. Right. And And yet, uh, it felt safe for me to be guided by a swim instructor instead of someone who like throws me off a boat in the ocean and be like, start practice swimming.
Right.
Right. But I think I was able to recognize that because of the last 3 years of sort of playing like in the world of chaos when there is no zero structure, is again sort of like you said, like finding that sweet spot of how do I have enough challenge that propels me forward, that I'm not bored, but the challenge not being so challenging that it puts me straight into worry and stress.
Yeah.
And that sweet spot is such a yummy, yummy place of excitement and vitality and aliveness. And it also can be everyday stuff, you know, like the way I decided to wash dishes today. Like, how do I create it? Because it does need to get done.
Right.
But how can I playfully play into that space too?
I love that because play can be elusive. It seems like, like it's like, oh, once you find it and you notice it, it's kind of like gone. And then the other marker for me is it really brings me into the present moment. So then, like, thinking about what I'm doing next or what I did earlier or whatever. But I love that what you said about, like, how can I play while I wash dishes or while I cook? I can put on some music or I can watch a YouTube video or I can like, how can I make this the most playful experience possible for myself? And doing that all day, if we can, and just being aware of it is transformative for everybody, like for your life, for sure. Yeah.
And sometimes it's, for me, it also had to be like catching myself when I think I don't have time to do something fun. And I shared this story maybe before in a different podcast. When writing this thesis, the introduction kind of makes this comment of like, why don't people play? And adults respond sometimes like, I don't have time for it, right?
Right.
And I remember while I was writing like one of the drafts, my ex-partner was like, hey, you want to go to the batting cages? And my first response back is like, I got no time for this. And I saw myself and I was like, whoa, I am this play researcher. And I literally just did exactly what I say that people do. But now that I have the awareness, I was like, oh yeah, I've been sitting here banging my head against this computer researching for 4 hours, getting really frustrated, getting really annoyed. Research currently is no longer fun because I'm trying to meet this deadline. And I went to the batting cages. And for those 30 minutes, and this is, again, how to activate different parts of our brain and why play gets so beneficial, is for those 30 minutes, my one job was to hit a ball. Yeah. And so my focus was like sort of just zoned in to this one activity. It wasn't this like chaotic, what is play, so much ambiguity, like, I don't know, it's like, it can feel very chaotic. And I was in a world of stress. But when it came down to being like, oh, for like 15 minutes, I'm just going to hit this ball, and that's my only job, like, it felt really good. And it felt really freeing because the ball, like you go to the batting cage, the ball is going to come regardless if you're ready or not. You just hit it, right? Yeah. And so you become really hyper-focused on it. And I was no longer in a state of worry. And I was no longer in a state of boredom. So it was sort of like, I sort of had to force myself to play. And then when I came back home, I was actually able to like crank out another 4 hours that felt really, really good. And so sometimes the medicine is like having the awareness that it's going to be good for you. And when it's like, again, sort of a container, right? A framework or a boundary of like, I'm only playing for this 30 minutes. Very easy task. Go there, hit a ball. And every time I did hit a ball, I felt really good. Yeah. And even if I didn't, the next ball came pretty fast and I didn't have time to think about my research, So batting cages is one of my, like, when people say like, how do I get started? I'm like, no, go try a batting cage, And I never grew up playing like baseball or softball or anything, and it was just like, okay, I'm just going to go try it.
It's not that serious,
Right. But again, some people might, if it becomes stressful and they're like in it and they're beating themselves up in it, then it's like, okay, that's not your play. And maybe something that you may want to put in the show notes is like, because a lot of people ask me like, how do I get started? And this guy, Stuart Brown, started the National Institute for Play, specifically for like re-educating and advocating similarly to what I am of like how important and vital health play is to our health and our vitality, to our mental health, holistically. And he had a really beautiful like survey of like how to identify your play personality, which kind of brings you back to like what actually sparked you when you were a child, because there's so many different ones out there.
So he has like a quiz you can take to.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I want to reference that for sure because that's important. I'm like thinking for myself, I'm like, dang, I want to go to the batting cages because for me that, and thinking for myself, like, how do I play? And I do love a good game like putt or batting cages or golf, and for me it often involves other people. Like playing. I went to the lake on Memorial Day and I ended up playing monkey in the middle with some kids, and I was like, it's like I'm the only adult over here, but this is fun because it is a game and it was with people, and those are the things. And then poker too is a game with other people. So those are the things that I like. But, and I know for yourself, you mentioned dance and swimming most recently, but what recently has put you in the play space, the flow state?
I've been also diving more into like art and like I'm also going to an art class right now. So I'm really trying to like stretch different areas of my brain, and all of these swimming, dance, art, I've carried limiting beliefs in them.
Yes.
And I am nervous about it, like even in social settings. And so I was like, okay, like how do I create a container that makes me feel safe? So finding a teacher that makes me feel nice, or like that is encouraging and nice, made me feel good, compared to maybe some teachers in my childhood that, said something that, as a child I was embarrassed about, or whatever it is. Right. But when I hear you talk about the play that you enjoy, Lindsay, one of the play personality is social play. So you may not need to take the survey, but you are welcome to take the survey. It sounds like, but like, some people like rumble and tumble play, like physical play, wrestling, things like that. Some people get really into like fantasy and imagination play. And so they might be like really big into like books, or just like, or they can get into painting and they're like drawing like amazing, like existential goddesses or gods, or, these like abstract art pieces, because they're really into like the imagination, and they might actually really don't like social play. They want to be like, their play is like when they're alone. Right. Yeah. And so, that's sort of the beauty of the survey, is like when someone doesn't know where to start, that is a good place to kind of be curious. And then also just like looking back at your childhood, like what actually sparked joy. And if it was like, if you really enjoyed like ice skating and you realize that you hadn't ice skated in like 10 or 20 years, it's like, okay, like see if you can borrow some ice skates in the winter and try to go ice skate and see what like shows up in your mind, body, and spirit once you get back onto the ice rink, like things like that.
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned that too, because I just took up roller skating again. I go to adult skate night sometimes on Thursday nights, because that for me is like just a ton of fun. The music's playing and it's all adults, and like, oh, it's so nostalgic for me. I love it.
Yay.
I'm actually pretty good at playing now that I think about it. I've been on my list of values and priorities. And that reminds me of what you said earlier about, you were like, oh, I don't have time. Or, as we learned in ALA, like people's most common excuses are usually money and time. And it's like, that's actually code for what are your values right now? What are your priorities right now? Is it this thing? Because money and time is just like this abstract excuse, like people are busy as shit for sure. And people are struggling financially right now. Like we all know that. So I'm not trying to make light of that at all, but, if you have time to research for 4 hours and bang your head against the wall for one, you got 30 minutes to go to the batting cage, right? I don't know.
Right. And that is, to me, it's like, it's simply an invitation.
Yeah.
And that's how I approach all of holistic health, activities, is like, and knowing applied epigenetics and how we're all genetically different, but our culture, our upbringing, our conditioning is all very uniquely different. The best that I can ever do is just invite someone, like, just go try and carve out 30 minutes of play in your life and see how that changes. Give it an honest, like, 30 days or whatever it is. It doesn't mean you have to do it daily either. Maybe give it, once a week or twice a week. Start dipping your toes in it and just use yourself as like a sandbox of discovery. I think being curious about it and wanting it is already a first step towards it. And then, sometimes it could be overwhelming, being like, I don't know what it is for me. And then again, we're too much in stress, but how can we lean back and just be like, I don't know, but I'm very curious about it. So I'm in discovery of it, and, making it a little bit looser than, because once we make it very strict in our life, like must do it every day.
Yeah.
Isn't going to be play anymore. Right. Yeah. And like you said, it doesn't mean don't do your responsibilities either. Right.
I think that's an interesting, like, kind of full circle thing. Cause I know, what you hinted at in the beginning was this became important to you because you felt like this was missing from your life. And so you started to, like, research it and value it more and more and more. And it sounds like now it's a fully integrated part of your day. So I'm curious, like, what you've noticed in yourself throughout that process, like your ways of being, how have those shifted based on you integrating more play?
Yeah, I would say that I'm less angry. I think I am also trying to control less in my life. And instead I look at it as, how can I use play to learn more about myself? And how can I just, like, laugh at the things that I can't control, which is actually pretty much everything in our life. We think we can control a lot of things, but we actually really can't. And that's like a false belief and a conditioning that society has sort of imprinted on us. And that's been a really interesting discovery, leaving a corporate job and becoming nomadic and really experimenting with, like, how can I create, like, a sustainable regenerative lifestyle without being fully trapped in the capitalistic system that is here. And I haven't figured that out. And again, like, there are days where it feels really, really daunting. And I know that I'm in a stress state, and I'm like, okay, like, how do I step back into more of a play state? And so I say that, like, it's not necessarily like rainbows and unicorn is play. Like, again, like, I can be researching a master's thesis paper. It happened to be a topic play, but I could be researching at anything. Like, if I was, it's like almost like finding the research that you're passionate about, right? When you find something that you are curious about and you're passionate about, again, you'll find into that, you find your brain in a place of no longer worry and boredom. Yeah. Right. So it's like, it's always sort of this, like, knowing yourself and pivoting. And I think the most important thing is, like, play isn't static, or like your way of being, of feeling like, oh, I'm in this, like, sweet spot. The sweet spot changes every day.
Yeah. Every moment.
I could have had terrible sleep last night. So I'm not going to have a super juicy, like, external exciting play day, but how can I still have a little bit of, maybe it's a more feminine, soft day. Maybe it's like taking a bath today, or maybe it's just cozying up and reading a book that kind of gets me out of my head, or like a young adult book or something like that, where it's like, I don't have to think. It's just like easy reading or whatever. Right. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, like, I think I'm also at a point where it's like, if I went back to a corporate job, I would be in it so much differently than who I was 5 years ago. Right. Like, I would create more space, more spaciousness for not just only play, but for, spontaneous events to occur.
Mm-hmm.
I think my previous lifestyle was like, I think I was like chasing happiness and chasing play. And I would like, work my 9 to 5, and then I would schedule things like every hour.
Yeah.
There was no space. But then if there was traffic that was going to be making me late, I would be like really angry about it. Right.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I'm just like,
play on time.
Yeah, like like must get to my poker game on time. Right. And when you reach that point, then it's like, whoa there.
There's something wrong here.
Right. So that's the thing about anything we do is, a lot of it is awareness. And I love how earlier you said, like, for you, sometimes it's also like a deeper level of presence.
Yeah.
And there is something about that, because when we're really engaged in whatever play activity we are in, we are also very, very present to what it is in that moment. And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of it. I think that's how there is a felt sense of like, oh, we're here. But like, it's like, but you don't even want to admit it. Cause like it's like, it, you feel it, but like the moment we get to our head and we're like, we're here, and then we overthink about it, then we lose it.
And like, get attached to it.
Right. Right. And so, anytime we get attached or cling to a state that we want to be in, then we're back in our brain, and we're back into some kind of, egoic attachment to something, and it becomes unhealthy for us again. So
annoying.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you feel like is important about play? One thing we didn't mention was, I know a lot of people are going to read the title of this and make it dirty, and it can be dirty if you want it to be, but we're not necessarily going to go there.
Yeah. I love that, because this also started, so through TIFA, through the Institute of Aliveness, we're about apply epigenetics and holistic health. And so we had a body semester, a mind semester, and a spirit semester. And, in the mind semester, or in each of these semesters, I wrote term papers, and I started with one that was called like the not so dirty secrets of adult play.
That's the one I read. I love that title.
Right. And adult play can be in the world of like sacred sexuality and sensuality. And that gets back right into the beginning of like this taboo around play. So when I say like sometimes like people carry shame about play, it could easily be people carry some shame around sexuality.
Totally.
If that is, when they think of play, they think of like, physical, sensual, intimate spaces, which can be a source of play.
Yeah.
And the reason I titled it that is because like I was again showing all this yummy like neuroscience around play. And if we attach play to only sexual experiences, it can also become very addictive, can become potentially toxic. And so the other invitation I have to the audience and to people is like how to intentionally create a lifestyle where like there are a variety of playful domains. And so no one source, whether it is poker, because poker could be addictive too, right? Or, intimate relationship with another, or like, let's say I become a competitive swimmer, and then now I am so strung up about winning. Swimming is no longer play for me. And it's not saying it's bad. Like maybe that becomes maybe I am an Olympian swimmer. Awesome. It's not a bad thing. But then go find another play that is not swimming. You gotta offset that, right?
Otherwise it's attachment.
Right. And then it could be a secure attachment. Like if you have a healthy relationship about like representing the United States and a gold medalist of an Olympian swimmer or whatever, right? Like you can do it, not, so it's not necessarily saying like be afraid of attachments, but just being like very present and aware and conscious of it all, right? Yeah, like so much yumminess, like in the world of like sacred sexuality. To me, one thing I hadn't shared, and we probably don't have a lot of time, is I also went through ISTA, which is the International School of Temple Arts. And it also really widened my scope of what sacred sexuality is and how vast in the world of playfulness that can be, that isn't just the typical what we see on television of what like sex means.
Right.
There is such a beautiful space of like, even like primal play when like the people who get really into like rumble and tumble play, like that just like really sparks them up. And you bring primal play into bed, like that is ecstatic and has nothing to do with what television says sex needs to be like. And so it's about like, how do I create more like ecstasy, or how do I create more vitality, or how do I create more aliveness? And sacred sexuality can definitely be a vessel for that. And so can hitting balls at a baseball field, and so can playing poker and swimming and ice skating. But like what I've discovered is the more that I try to create diversity in my playing field, the more erotic life is altogether. And one of my favorite like relationship gurus is Esther Perel, and she speaks into like that sense of eroticness, again, not from a sexual context of like, it is just like a source of like eros and aliveness. Like how can I make love with like the wind and the water that is so abundant everywhere in my life? But that's probably like a whole nother area that you and I could dive into in terms of like liberated life. Like, you know, play was just one place that has opened me up, but also like sacred sexuality, but taking it out of maybe the sexual context, but into like, how do I have a sensual or a very intimate relationship with all of life, including like maybe even just like slowly like touching myself and just being like, wow, like I am such a powerful being that I can create this like level of ecstasy just by myself. And a lot of it just kind of comes through different trainings and different ways of breaking free of our limiting beliefs. And I think that's such a, when I think about liberated life and freedom, it's like freedom from ourselves and the conditioning that has upon us. Right.
Yep. And that's exactly our little tagline is, you know, content generated with the intention to inspire people to free themselves, right? Because you can't really free someone else. You can free yourself and inspire them to free themselves, but you can't really necessarily free others, because it does come down to a lot of the conditioning that we all undergo, which is unique and similar in some ways, of course. But yeah, I love that you brought that in full circle. Liberated life, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have deep gratitude for you starting this podcast and really just continuing to be the permission and a role model and an inspiration of like, what are some maybe non-traditional lifestyles that people can have? And we're not trying to sugarcoat it. Like there are days where I'm like overwhelmed with the amount of choices there are in my life. And those are the days where I take a breath and I just maybe go play to expand my mind in a different space. And I come back and maybe I meditate. And maybe that day is more about like down regulating my nervous system so I feel safe because for whatever reason, whether it's the astrology or the cosmic, you know, collective, I'm feeling very, you know, very intense or whatever it is. Right. But yeah, super duper incredibly grateful and honored to be here and to have you continue to shine your gifts and your stories and your guests to be curious of like what else is out there. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, girl. Thank you. It's like, I love connecting with you every time we connect, and you always share some super golden nuggets with me, and now you get to share them with the world too. So thank you.
Thank you.